everyone. Welcome back to RetroComms. Today I've got my collection of HTC devices to show you all today. There aren't very many, as HTC wasn't the most common, and I haven't acquired quite as many. But the phones that I have in front of me today, well, by looking at them, perhaps you can see why HTC's slogan was quietly brilliant. For starters, we've got this HTC Freestyle. It is a pre-Android smartphone that runs on HTC's own proprietary OS. In this operating system, they did still use the little flip card style clock, which was common throughout HTC's later Android line. This one is metallic in construction. I believe this is an aluminum body it has here. Very premium feeling in the hand. And something I will note on some of these HTCs, you might have a hard time figuring out where the battery cover is for some, but right down here is the battery cover. I can't get this one off with one hand, but maybe I'll show you one later on in the video that's a bit easier to remove. Next, we have the HTC Desire. This one is of more traditional construction. Simple removable battery cover up here. Given these buttons down here, I do know that it is pre-Android. Again, I forget the name of HTC's OS from back then. If anyone knows, let me know down in the comments. Next up, we have what I consider to be one of HTC's most important handsets, the HTC G1. It is, I would like to call it a slider, but this doesn't really slide in the way that a normal one does. If we look closer, it's more of this little hinge mechanism. I'll show it to you from this side as well. But still, despite the strange movement, this is a neat little phone. Full QWERTY keyboard with a number row and a trackball, reminiscent of BlackBerry, and a nice little curvature that made the phone more comfortable to talk on if held up to the ear, as one would do. There's its little camera back there, Google branding, as this was one of the early Android devices, Google's OS, trying to get their name out there. I believe this one is on T-Mobile, yes, right up there. And they did make one of these in white, but I only have the black one. Sadly, its bezel is broken down here. Charges via mini USB, but sadly no 3.5mm headphone jack on this one. This is still when they were trying to get the features of the common Android phone sorted out. I guess that was not quite standard just yet. But despite this is a neat little device. Moving on, continuing with the theme of trackballs, the HTC MyTouch. Google branding and MyTouch branding there on the back. There's its camera. This one is a little bit worse for wear. It too is on T-Mobile. Bit of discoloration down there at the trackball. This one definitely saw a lot of use. Fortunately, this one does have a 3.5mm headphone jack, and it does run on Android, as will the rest of the phones, save for that one down there, which we'll cover at the end, in this grouping of HTC devices. Next up, I have not one but two HTC Droid Incredibles. I believe this one, yes, this one is in better shape. I'll show this one to you guys. There's its little home button, of course the Android capacitive keys down there, charges via micro USB, red accents around the device. This was a Verizon version. I believe they were Verizon exclusive. This is from back when Motorola and HTC were the two dominant players in the Android handset market. Samsung was slowly gaining momentum with the Galaxy series, but if you were a power user in search of a premium Android experience, you went with perhaps one of these HTC's Incredibles or an Evo. Or if you chose Motorola, you would go with the Droid 2 Global or the Droid X. This was from around that same era. I don't know an exact year, but still, interesting point in HTC's history. Coming down here, we've got the Evo Design. This one returning back to the form factor that we saw up there with the Desire and the Freestyle. This one has a metallic frame to it. One of those odd battery covers comes off like so. This one's a bit easier to remove, so I can show you. This one charges via micro USB, 3.5 millimeter headphone jack up there, and it does run Android. And a quick note about this design. HTC did continue to use that for later handsets, as I'll show you here soon, but also in their 1M series, the M7, the M8, going forward. Sadly, I do not have those, but overall, with this construction, they are very solidly built devices. Up next, one of my personal favorites, I bet you can guess why, the HTC Evo Shift 4G. This one is on Sprint, sadly lacking a number row, but still feels quite comfortable in the hand. The 4 Android capacitive keys down there. We've got its camera, 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, power button up there. Charging port is right there, charges via micro USB, and I love the blue color on this one. Too bad it's gotten some scuffs and dings, and the slider does feel a bit loose. And if you'll note here, still with the Google branding there. This was from a time when Android was still in its earlier phases. People were still slowly adopting it, so Google was still trying to get their name out. Next up, we have 4 of these HTC Inspire 4G. This one is a little bit different, as I'll soon show you why. Its battery cover is right here. And the battery comes out like so. Just in case any of you have one of these and were curious. Down here is yet another removable cover for the SIM card and SD card. I'll show you a complete one. Again, it has to rely on these little covers here because it's that unibody construction. Now be careful with this battery cover if you own one, because you might end up with something like this one down here, where you lose your volume buttons. That is what happened to me. I was trying to get the battery out of this thing, and the volume keys fell out. Despite that, these are pretty solid handsets. 4G, as the name would suggest. Down here, we've got the 3.5 millimeter, the micro USB, camera back here, flashlight up top. Interesting design choices from HTC. And last but most certainly not least, let's have a look at this one. I'm not quite sure of its model. Sadly, I've not been able to charge it as it does not have a battery. It runs on Windows Mobile, perhaps something reminiscent of the Moto Q. If we look around, it has an IR port here, a couple of little function keys there. And you may have noticed it is on Vodafone, which is not a common carrier in my nation. Well, this isn't a common keyboard layout in my nation either. This phone most likely came from Germany. If you'll notice, the Z and the Y keys here are in the opposite position as they normally are on an American phone's keyboard. This is the German layout. I'm very curious about this device. It is, despite its thickness, a very interesting phone here. It comes complete with its little stylus. That's a mini USB. I believe that's 3.5 millimeter down there. I want to learn more about this device, but sadly, without its battery, I'm not quite sure what features it might have had. I would love to get this powered up. If any of you guys know what model it is, and if a comparable version was sold here in the States, to where I might be able to find a battery for it more easily, please do let me know down in the comments. Would love to see this one up and running. And before I sign off, I'd like to mention a couple of more notable HTC handsets. Again, the HTC One, M7, and M8, which I'll find a picture of one of those and display on the screen here for you. The HTC Cha-Cha, which is a handset that I do want to acquire sometime. It's an interesting form factor, not something we saw often out of HTC. And also, a notable one, the HTC Resound, and their collaboration with Beats Audio during the height of both HTC and Beats Audio's popularity. Excellent combination. I used to have one of those, but traded it to my good friend Tony. It was rooted. I think I threw a custom ROM on it. Couldn't get it to function quite correctly, but still an interesting little device. And with that, if you enjoyed, let me know down in the comments. Any questions about any of these devices? Any comments? If I got a model number wrong, please do let me know. Until then, this is RetroComms signing off.